The winter of 1897 was unlike anything the people of the Appalachian Mountains had ever seen. For days, a violent snowstorm tore through the valley, freezing everything in its path. Cabins that once stood strong now cracked under the weight of ice and snow. Families huddled together, struggling to survive as freezing winds seeped through broken walls. But in the middle of this disaster, one cabin remained standing, warm, dry, and safe. Its chimney continued to smoke, its walls held firm, and the families inside survived the storm that destroyed nearly every other home in the hollow. How did one man build a home that could survive what others could not? To understand that, we need to go back 3 years, to the autumn of 1894. A small group of families settles in a quiet Appalachian valley, preparing to build new homes before winter arrives. Wood is cut, logs are stacked, and cabins begin to rise quickly. Everyone is in a race against time. Among these settlers was a man named Silas McReynolds. Unlike the others, Silas arrived with a wagon full of stones, not lumber. While others began building their walls first, Silas started with the ground beneath his future home. To the people watching him, this made no sense at all. Silas wasn't building slowly because he lacked skill. He was building carefully because of what he had lived through before. Years earlier, in Pennsylvania, Silas experienced a winter where moisture destroyed his family's home from the ground up. Floors rotted, walls molded, the cold crept in through damp wood. An old stonemason named Heinrich Weber taught Silas a lesson he would never forget. A home doesn't fail from the roof, it fails from the ground. Silas promised himself that if he ever built again, he would build a foundation that water could never touch. But to his new neighbors, Silas's approach looked foolish. Why waste time on stones when winter was coming fast? People stopped to watch and whisper. Some joked that Silas was building a fortress instead of a cabin. Among them was Tom Crenshaw, the most respected builder in the hollow. He believed that cabins were meant to sit directly on the ground, just like generations had done before. Silas worked quietly, ignoring the laughter. He knew time would reveal the truth. The community believed that Silas was wasting precious time, but the mountains had a way of testing every home and every builder. The first winter would only be a warning. The real storm was still years away. As night settled over the valley, families gathered inside their newly built cabins. The glow of lanterns lit their walls with warmth and hope. Children laughed, unaware of the silent battle their homes were already losing against the damp earth beneath them. Silas stepped outside his unfinished cabin and looked across the hollow. He saw families sharing meals, celebrating the start of a new life. He wished, more than anything, that every one of them would have a safe home for the winter. But deep inside, Silas carried a fear born from experience. He knew that comfort built in a hurry never lasts long, and the mountains would test every choice they made. Little did anyone know, the decisions made that autumn would soon decide who survived and who did not. As autumn settled in, the valley came alive with the sound of construction. Settlers hurried to finish their cabins before the winter chill arrived. Logs were stacked, roofs were raised, and smoke from campfires drifted across the hollow as families prepared for their first winter. But while others built upward, Silas worked close to the ground. He carefully positioned each stone, shaping, testing, and aligning them. He wasn't competing with time. He was building a foundation meant to outlast it. Most settlers never questioned the ground beneath their cabins. Building directly on soil was the way their fathers and grandfathers had done it. But Silas knew the danger hidden below, a danger that ruined his past home. By lifting the cabin off the earth, air could move freely underneath and keep the wood dry. A raised foundation protected the home from moisture, rot, insects, and cold. It was simple, it was smart, yet almost no one in the valley believed it mattered. Neighbors paused their own work to watch Silas. Some shook their heads. Others laughed quietly at the sight of a man spending so much time on rocks instead of building walls. Time was precious, and winter did not wait for perfection. Silas heard the whispers, but he continued working with steady hands and a calm heart. Experience had taught him that a home's strength was never decided by speed, only by patience and wisdom. As the days passed, a nickname began to spread. People started calling Silas the Stone Fool. To them, he was wasting strength on stones when winter was only weeks away. But Silas didn't build for the first winter. He built for the 10th. He built for the storms no one expected. By late fall, Silas completed his stone foundation, solid, level, built with intention. Only then did he begin raising the frame of his cabin. He was weeks behind everyone else, but his home now rested on a base that could withstand time, weather, and the unseen threats below. As the first signs of winter touched the valley, families settled into their warm cabins, confident they were ready for the cold. None of them knew the real test was still years away. As autumn turned to winter, the first rains began to fall across the valley. The newly built cabins, still fresh with the scent of cut timber, now faced their first real challenge. At first, the rain felt ordinary, soft showers tapping against wooden roofs. But as days passed, the soil softened, puddles formed beneath the homes, and the ground beneath the settlers' cabins began to drink in the moisture. Inside many of these homes, clothes hung near the fire refused to dry. The floors felt damp under blankets and rugs. Cold crept upward from the soil and settled inside the walls like an unwelcome guest. Families added more wood to their fires, but the warmth seemed to disappear as quickly as it came. The cabins built directly on the ground were slowly absorbing the wet earth beneath them. But inside Silas McReynolds' unfinished home, things were different. His stone foundation lifted the wood high enough for air to flow beneath it. The rainwater passed under and away from the cabin rather than into it. While others complained about dampness and cold floors, Silas's family had a dry place to sleep and a fire that warmed the cabin without fighting against the wet ground. As winter settled deeper, the contrast grew clearer. Some families woke up to frost forming on the inside walls of their cabins. Wood that should have insulated them now trapped the wet cold in the rooms where they slept. Coughs became common. Blankets felt heavy with moisture rather than warmth. A few quiet voices wondered if Silas's strange foundation had been right all along, but most dismissed the thought. After all, everyone survived the winter, or so they believed. For the valley, this first winter was only a warning. The real danger was not in the cold they felt that year, but in the damage quietly forming beneath their feet. Moisture had already begun its slow work, and what the rain started, time would finish. By the time spring gave way to summer, the valley had already begun to show subtle signs of strain. Rain showers became more frequent, turning paths into mud and soaking the fields where children once played. What should have been a season of warmth and growth slowly shifted into a summer unlike any the settlers had expected. The rain did not come and go. It stayed. For weeks, the clouds hung low over the mountains, pouring water into the soil until the ground could hold no more. Cabins built directly on the earth began to suffer. Moisture crept deeper into the wood, softening floors and darkening corners. A musty smell settled into every room, clinging to clothes, blankets, and even the air they breathed. Inside many homes, the floors had begun to sag. Insects found shelter in the damp wood, and mold quietly threaded itself through the walls. Children who once ran barefoot across cabin floors were now warned not to, for boards felt weak beneath their steps. Families tried to keep up, sweeping water, airing bedding, hanging clothes, yet nothing ever felt dry. Meanwhile, Silas McReynolds continued to work on his cabin, adding walls only after confirming his foundation remained perfectly dry. Even during the worst rains, water passed under his home without touching the wood. Neighbors, now feeling the effects of their rushed building, watched him with less laughter and more curiosity. Some wondered if the man they once mocked had understood something they didn't. But pride is a powerful barrier. Though a few quietly admitted discomfort, no one dared to say they had made a mistake. Instead, they hoped the rains would pass, that summer would lighten, that autumn would dry their homes enough to forget. But the valley remembered. The damage, although invisible to most, had already begun shaping the fate of the coming years. What moisture had weakened. Before we continue to the harsh winter that changed everything, a quick subscribe really helps support the channel. The year 1897 arrived with a sense of calm, and for a time, the valley believed the worst was behind them. The summer rains had finally passed, and autumn brought cooler, pleasant days. Many thought the hardships of the previous years were nothing more than bad luck, but nature was simply preparing its final lesson, one that no family in the valley would ever forget. As winter approached, a cold unlike any the settlers had experienced swept across the Appalachian Mountains. A freezing wind cut through the valley, followed by heavy snowfall that buried the land in silence. At first, families stayed warm inside their cabins, burning through their stacked firewood, but soon, the cold began to seep in through the very floors beneath them, floors weakened by years of moisture. Cabins built directly on the ground struggled to hold heat. Fires burned constantly, yet families still shivered through the nights. Frost formed inside walls, and the damp wood that once smelled of fresh timber now carried the bitter scent of rot. Children fell ill. Parents wrapped them in blankets, praying their homes would hold through the storm. Then came the breaking point. As snow piled higher and temperatures dropped dangerously low, the wooden beams of several cabins gave way. Homes began to crack, sag, and collapse under the weight of ice and snow. Families rushed outside into the freezing night, carrying what little they could. Some sought shelter in barns, others huddled beneath makeshift coverings, waiting for the storm to pass. But one cabin stood firm. The home of Silas McReynolds, raised high on stone, remained warm and dry. The wind howled outside, yet the structure held strong. One family knocked, then another. Soon, Silas opened his door to neighbors desperate for warmth. He welcomed them in without hesitation. The same people who once laughed at his stones now stood inside the only safe refuge in the valley. Dozens survived inside that single cabin, a home built not for speed, but for survival. While the storm raged for days, Silas's foundation never shifted, never cracked, and never allowed the cold to sink in. A lesson had been delivered by the mountains themselves, and in that moment, every settler understood. A home must be built for the worst day, not the best one. When spring finally arrived, the snow melted to reveal what the storm had left behind. The valley that once seemed full of promise now carried the scars of a harsh lesson. Cabins that families had built with hope just a few years earlier now lay broken, weakened, or unsafe to live in. Some homes leaned to one side, others had sunken floors, and a few had collapsed entirely. The cost of building quickly had finally revealed itself, but where despair might have taken root, something else began to grow. The settlers now looked to the one home that had endured the storm, the home of Silas McReynolds. The man once mocked as the stone fool was now the one people turned to for guidance. Humility replaced pride as neighbors approached Silas to ask how to rebuild the right way. And Silas, without resentment, shared everything he knew. Together, they began again. This time, the sound of construction in the valley was different. There was no rushing, no shortcuts, no laughter at methods they did not understand. Under Silas's guidance, cabins were raised on stone foundations, each one lifted from the damp earth, each one built with patience and purpose. Families gathered stones from nearby hills and worked side by side, rebuilding not only their homes, but their sense of community. As walls went up and roofs took shape, the valley slowly transformed. Children watched their parents build with care, learning the value of doing things right the first time. The new home stood proudly above the ground, prepared for whatever seasons might bring. The memory of the great winter remained, not as a tragedy, but as a turning point, a lesson that changed the valley forever. Silas never asked for recognition, but his legacy had already begun. A simple idea, born from hardship, had now reshaped an entire community, and from that moment on, No home in the valley was built without a foundation of stone. Years passed, and the valley grew into a strong and thriving community. Children who once watched their parents rebuild grew up knowing only one way to build a home, the right way. Stone foundations became a tradition, not a choice. Travelers passing through the mountains often wondered why every cabin here stood proudly above the ground, never touching the soil. The answer lived in the stories told by the fireside, passed down from parents to their children. Silas McReynolds, the quiet man who once worked alone as others laughed, grew old watching the valley flourish. He never boasted about what he had done, never reminded anyone of the night so many were saved beneath his roof. For Silas, it wasn't about being right, it was about doing what was needed, even when no one understood. On cold nights, the people of the valley would look at their homes, warm and dry, and remember the winter that nearly broke them. They would speak of the man who built with patience when others rushed, who chose wisdom over speed, and who opened his door without hesitation when lives depended on it. Silas's cabin remained a symbol, not of survival alone, but of foresight, humility, and the strength of doing things the right way, even when it's the harder path. Long after Silas was gone, his lesson lived on. Generations later, his story continued to echo through the mountains. A home must be built for the worst day, not the best one. Parents taught their children that foundations mattered in more than just buildings, in life, in choices, and in character. The valley never forgot the winter of 1897, and it never forgot the man who saved them, not with wealth, not with force, but with wisdom, care, and stones placed with purpose. His legacy was not written in books or carved in monuments. It stood beneath every home that endured the test of time. If this story touched you, subscribe for more inspiring true tales that remind us of the values that truly matter.